subcontract virtually its whole operation to Marian Roberts. We also see a significant proportion of the workforce in Anglo Plus, Impala and Lonmin employed through subcontractors and labor brokers. And this is a typical sort of employment, flexible work arrangement that you see in the platinum, typically the platinum mining, where you see mining houses have their own employees, labor brokers, then there are labor brokers only employee. Then at the same time also see subcontractors who have also got, so it's a chain in terms of subcontract. Then another contour fragmentation, we see a new settlement geography emerging in the platinum, especially after the attainment of democracy and after the negotiation for living out allowance by the National Union of Mine Workers with the employers, where we see what Professor Mhlungu and Andres have argued, that we have seen a situation where they shifted from compounded labor to fragmented labor with the demise of the hostel system, where we see that the hostels are no longer the center in terms of workers' control. We see a proliferation of informal settlement. For example, Lonmin, in its end-of-year reports, it clearly indicates that at least 50% of the people who live within a 15-kilometer radius of its operation, they live in informal settlement. And in Rustenburg municipality, 45% of the dwelling there, they are informal, I mean backyard and shacks. So we see a new settlement geography emerging there in the platinum mining belt, which in a way also is reproducing these ethnic divisions as was in the hostels, where you find there are patches where you find in this informal settlement where certain ethnic groups tend to be dominant. So which brings in the questions of, it raises the question of who is local, which is very important in terms of accessing jobs in the platinum mining belt. And it also has created tensions within the local community, the traditional local communities, and the new communities that are emerging, the informal sector, who in some cases are, in terms of numbers, they are more than the communities that are recognized by the mining houses. So we have also seen a broadening in terms of the skills level for black workers after the attainment of democracy, where we see that blacks were mainly predominantly confined within the unskilled job levels. After the attainment of democracy, this has changed, where we see now you can find black workers in almost from the CEO we saw yesterday in the video tape, where the face of Lonmin was, instead of it was black. So you find that we have seen a broadening in terms of the skill level. So this has undermined in terms of the worker collective solidarity, because workers are not sort of homogeneous. They are heterogeneous. They are not like what they were in the past in terms of the profile. Then we also see continuity and discontinuity in the migrant labor system, which in a way is continuing, but in a way it's continuing, but in a different form. In a different form. So where we see that the sources of labor from the eastern, a lot of the workers are still coming from the Eastern Cape, Lesotho, Mozambique and Swaziland, and this also raises the question of ethnicity, citizenship, which also in a way undermines worker solidarity. Then in terms of the language, we see a situation whereby during the strike, the workers using the two groups, the workers organized by the NUM and the NUM, AMCO and the committees, virtually using different languages to address the same workers. Where we find the NUM use predominantly Xhosa, Tswana and English, which is one of the local languages in Rustenburg. And the workers' committee and AMCO, they consciously used Fanakalo. So I tried to sort of like to understand, to explore this variation. And this is what I got from one of the shop stewards from the NEM, from Impala Platinum. I said, Fanakalo is not a language, it's a command language that is not explicit and thus cannot be promoted. It's just a command for work, like Fakalapa, Bekalapa, that's all. For us blacks, it symbolizes inferiority, it makes us inferior beings. If you speak Fanakalo, you are perceived to be uneducated. It is a language of the uneducated. This is the position of NEM. Then at the same time, I also interviewed the Workers' Committee and AMCO, the fact my brother. They indicated to me, the Internet Committee used Fanakalo to build unity and solidarity amongst the workers. We are a diverse group and many of us are illiterate. To us it means togetherness, unity, common understanding. It is a communication of the hard work. It's a language of the hard work. The committee uses Fanakalo because they are in touch with what is happening on the ground. Unlike NEM, they are in touch with the reality. They know what is happening. The Interim Committee are the people who are coming from within us. They are part of those who are doing the hard work. They know what is happening. They know what we want. They know what is appropriate for the workers. So we see a situation where language is appropriated and has got different meanings to the different categories of workers. Then in terms of the context of solidarity, we see a situation where the workers are mobilized beyond the workplace, the role of violence, where we see that the workers are mobilized. There's a mobilization even of the unemployed. When you look at the strike at Lonmin, not all the workers who were at the mountain were workers for Lonmin. It also included members of the community and workers and unemployed workers. So this is how sort of like they sort of in a way sort of broaden their struggles and also engaged with the members of the local community. Then we see in terms of solidarity, we see the strikes being characterized by different forms of violence, for example, the beating of scalps, state violence, and also, but violence serves the number of functions for different stakeholders, one of which I argue, it was also one of the means that the workers managed to forge a collective worker solidarity. I don't have time to explain how, but this is one of the arguments that I'm trying to. Then at the same time, we also see the role of Sangoma and Muti, because they also played an important sort of role in terms of understanding the trajectories, in terms of the underlying dynamics in this strike work, where we see that in terms of religion, many of us tend to religion in the face of formidable challenges that we cannot explain in our life. I mean, in terms of life challenges, and for many of the mine workers, Muti and Sangoma, it falls in this paradigm. So where we see that as Sangomas have supernatural powers, they communicate with our ancestors, they give guidance, they give direction when we are facing crisis. They strengthen and unite, and at the same time, it was a way in which the workers, they managed to forge solidarity through the Sangoma and Muti. It sort of like united the workers, it sort of like gave them hope in terms of the challenges that they were facing at the workplace. Then in conclusion, I would say neoliberal global capitalism, it thrives on fragmentation, which undermines workers' solidarity. And we see that strike violence, Muti, and Sangomas are some of the responses by the workers to re-establish worker collective solidarity. And at the same time, we see that strike violence is it's an ambiguous phenomenon. On one hand, it highlights lack of solidarity, and at the same time, it may also be a means of forging worker collective solidarity. Thank you.
Crispin, that was outstanding. I think we should give him his doctorate right away. Dr. Chingana. I think Crispin has demonstrated one of the key methodologies of the new labour studies, and that's workplace ethnography. We saw an example in the previous session with Asanda Benyo, where he's able to get inside and come up inside the workplace and come up with fascinating sociological insights, for example, about language. Thank you very much, Crispin. We now hand it over to our last speaker, who's going to address us on workplace committees, Luke Simwell from the University of Johannesburg. Over to you.
Okay, thanks. Okay, can everyone hear me? I'm a little taller than everyone else, so... Okay, thanks very much for those presentations. I'm actually inspired by all the knowledge that is coming out here from labor historians, people talking about the political economy, and then students who are doing detailed ethnographic work. My comfort zone is actually, scholarly, is actually around service delivery protests, radical theories of participatory democracy, and popular protest. And these workers' committees are of interest to me because they actually constitute social movements. They use institutional and non-institutional mechanisms to achieve social change. They use contentious politics and they organize with groups of people over a sustained period of time. My first interaction with this new form of workers' organization was at the end of August last year in Marikana. I hadn't been to the Platinum Belt before, and then, so this is part of the shift towards the Platinum Belt academically as well. I was drawn in by a number of academics and activists. I remember being in Marikana and not knowing, you know, which stakeholder was which. It wasn't really clear to the majority of people at that time that there was actually a workers' committee in Marikana. This is now a couple weeks after the massacre. Everyone is talking about NUM and AMCU. And I remember specifically, I was with Tapelo Lehoa, who now does work with the Daily Maverick. And we were walking around talking to people, and there was a group sitting in the grass. After the Marikana massacre, workers met below the mountain, and they continued to meet there for some weeks. And we actually managed to locate this workers' committee. We didn't know exactly what it was. It was a group of workers sitting in the grass, but the workers were directing us to them, saying, if you want to engage with the workers, first you have to talk to them first. So we went over to them and started talking to them. And I'm reminded of some of the things that Dunbar was saying now. He said, never try to tell the workers anything. Never take the liberty to decide for them. And the workers, we were telling them, this is the research we're doing, and they were interested. They were willing to help. We also told them there was an organization called the Marikana, at that time it was called the Marikana Solidarity Campaign. And the first thing they said to us was, who gave them the right to form this organization? So I remember Tapelo quickly saying, no, sorry, we'll go back to them and talk. They said if they want to still exist as an organization that relates to Marikana, they should come here in 48 hours and meet with us. And then, in fact, they did manage to come and speak to them, and now they changed the name from Marikana Solidarity because Solidarity was another union operating in Longman, and now it's the Marikana Support Campaign. I just wanted to show, I don't know how many people were at Rihad Desai's Miners Shot Down last night, but it looks like we have a much bigger group, so probably a lot of you haven't seen this footage. I just wanted to give like an indication of what this workers' committee was looking like in action. This is on the 13th of August. As a lot of you will know, the workers were shot at by NUM officials. A lot of the workers believe that 2 people were shot killed. After that, prior to that, the workers were not carrying any weapons. After that, they took up their weapons and went into the mountain and waited for their employer, effectively symbolically taking the negotiating table out of the office of the employers and placing it below the mountain. And here, a group of the workers are marching to walk to Kari mine to prevent some other workers And last night I listened to Greg Marinovich make an interesting point, because a lot of the time it's difficult to, he said he didn't know if they were looking for solidarity, or if there was some kind of fragmentation, or if there was some kind of force. So a lot of the time it's difficult to see, what is actually happening here. Are the workers unifying because they're being forced to, or do they feel, the moral power of the movement and want to join in? But these workers, I'm not sure you'll even be able to hear it.
Inkinga yetu nyezi zinto enisiphethe azikho emthethweni. Manje mayibeke ndifuna kuhamba ngiyocela umuntu ngamunye anginikeze lezi zinto. Lalelani ke, lalelani.
Okay, so I'm not going to show you the entire clip, but if you watch Rihad Desai's film, you'll actually see the translation there, and you'll see the entire story from the beginning, when the Workers' Committee was formed, until I think it goes up until the final day of the massacre. But basically what's happening there is that the police are asking the mine workers to let go of their weapons, and the mine workers are refusing, saying NUM has attacked us and will only give you the weapons when we get back to the mountain. But even there you can see the Workers' Committee is in operation. People talk about this 5 Madoda, and it's not clear where this term comes from. One of the key mine workers was saying you can only have 5 mine workers going into the mine offices. But the number of people involved in these committees, particularly in Amplats and Longman, has changed over time. So there's been, sometimes you'll have 5 people going forward to negotiate with the police on behalf. So they negotiate directly. The workers decide what's going to happen. They give the information to these 5 people. The 5 people give the information to the police or to the NUM, and then they come back and report back to the workers. But the number of people has shifted over time. One of the mine workers, who was one of the members of the Workers' Committee, and who happened to be an RDO, said that there was 15 mine workers who were on this committee. From the 11th of August, they elected some kind of new, slightly more formal committee after they went to the mountain. There was 5 from each shaft, 5 from Eastern, 5 from Western, and 5 from Korea, and it was not dominated by any particular union, although Korea, as a lot of you know, was AMCU dominated. Most of the workers' committees were actually a mix, and even the key leader that Rihad shows in his film is actually from Western Platinum, and I believe was a member of NUM until after the strike ended. There's another thing, since, watching Rihad's film was reminding me and bringing out important points. One of the points that it brought out was that the employers hide behind the police who will get the workers to go back to work. They were saying the police act as a shield against workers' rights. And here is another quote from a worker who is now an AMCU shop steward. He says, "We are working underground and it is hard, and when we look at other people, they are doing better than us and they are not working underground. And so when we try to get a decent salary, government keeps forcing us to go back to work. That is what made us feel so strong about going on strike." The work that we are doing is difficult. Working underground is like a policeman pointing a gun at you, because when we are working, you are faced with death every time, and we know that death here on the surface is better than death underground. And now the police are trying to kill us. We thought it better that we die in front of him. This is actually a quote from an Amplatz worker. And a lot of what I'm going to tell you for the rest of this presentation is actually about workers from Anglo-America, from Amplatz, the largest platinum mine in the world, particularly focusing on the Rustenburg region and the strike committee that was formed there. And you can see very definite similarities between Amplatz and Longman, although they obviously have like different peculiarities about each of the strike committees. But what's clear is that they formed independent, in both areas, they formed independent strike committees. Over time, they felt betrayed by NUM. Then they went on strike independently from the unions. Again, over time, workers' committees themselves, and Dunbar was referring to this, are the ones who went to AMCU so that they could actually have a union. Basically what they did, and this may be an oversimplification, but they did manage to gain, a certain amount of unity amongst the workers, a definite amount of legitimacy amongst the workers, and an amount of legitimacy between the workers and the employers. Effectively, they replaced the unions, so that after the Marikana massacre on the 16th, a new workers' committee in Longman, after the massacre, was elected in order to negotiate directly with the employers. The same thing happened in Amplatz, except that during the strike, the leaders of the Amplatz strike committee were actually engaging directly with the employers. The part of legitimacy behind the workers giving legitimacy to the strike leaders is in part proven, or at least it seems it is, that the workers elected the leaders of the strike committees to be their AMCU shop stewards. So in almost every single leader of the strike committees that I've interviewed, and I think there were up to 47 at some point in Amplatz, and probably something in the area of 15 to 25 in Longman. Virtually all of those people have become shop stewards or chef committee or branch committee members of AMCU. They've been elected by the workers to negotiate and to be part of AMCU and to represent them. I wanted to engage with, in my paper, I don't know if if other people have papers, but in the paper that I'm developing, one of the main things that I go into is an engagement with the work of Paul Stewart, because he's actually, we hardly know anything about the workers' committees, but he's trying to give an explanation and a historical analysis of how rock drill operators are at the center of production, and we need to understand how how they organize, and give a sociological analysis of the rock drill operators in order to understand, how these strikes unfolded and what's happening in the platinum industry. And the interesting thing about what's happening in Amplatz is that the key leaders of the major strike in Rustenburg were actually winch drivers. So I'm going to just tell that story quickly now, because if I continue talking, I'm going to use all my time. I'm going to read this. The notorious strike at Anglo-American Platinum Amplatz in Rustenburg began on the evening of 11th September 2012 and lasted until 18 November 2012, an impressive 8 weeks total, longer than both Longman and Impala, is that correct? Which also held unprecedented strikes in the platinum industry that year. Responding in part to the suggestion that the strike at Amplatz was directly linked to that of the massacre on 16 August 2012, one of the strike leaders told the Mail and Guardian that our basic issue started on May 31st, 2012. Marikana at that time didn't have anything. It took our action time to build up. Longman doesn't have anything to do with it. In actuality, the roots of the 2012 strike action in Amplats, if I'm correct, and the formation of an informal committee that was non-union affiliated can be traced back slightly earlier when workers became aware that RDOs were given an increase of 750 Rand per month and then promised an additional 250 at the beginning of 2013. Then there was a moment of quietness amongst the workers. The rock drill operators had gotten what they wanted. The winch drivers started to organize. It began, and I'm using pseudonyms. It began when Solomon had something in mind, something which would in the next several months capture the imagination of the entire Rustenburg region of Amplats and beyond. Like many of the workers at Kruseleka, one of the major shafts at Amplats, Solomon was not unionized before or during the 2000 strike. He finished his matric in 1999, worked as a truck driver at Goldfield in Carletonville from 2003 until 2009, and arrived at Amplats in January 2010. He was never a member of a union at the mines until January 2013, when he and his fellow workers decided to join AMCU, a decision that will be revisited later in this paper and that I discuss. Solomon could see that the NUM failed us at Goldfields. He remembers that by the time he came to work at Rustenburg, I was fed up with the NUM, I was fed up with the way they treated the workers. Solomon worked night shift with another winch driver named Dylan, who had come to the mines in 1978 and had his front teeth smashed out in 1985 by the apartheid police while struggling to bring the NUM to the mines. He was a long-standing leader with vast experience, the quintessential insider. At 56, Dylan was 20 years older than Solomon. Reflecting on the relationship that they had, Solomon stated that he can't be my friend about the issues that were happening in the mine. I took him as my father. Early in May 2012, he approached Dylan, the older guy. He said, "Hey old man, it's been a while that you are working here. How did it become that the RDOs are being paid this money and then we do not get that money? If you are imagining the RDOs that are boring a square, there are 5 of them, but I was a winch driver, I was opening the square alone. It means it's 5 against 1. So if they say the RDOs are given the 1,000 Rand allowance because they say they are working hard, more than who? Because we are all working hard." The two discussed this issue together, and then Dylan said, "We must sell this to the workers." They agreed that the workers needed to decide for themselves the way forward. Thereafter, they began to meet at night shift with a group of about 5 workers to discuss issues. Like it seems as if the company is robbing us here and there. The risk allowance, we won't get it when we are working at night shift, but it is the same as if you were working during the day. The area that you are working at, it's risky. At first, it was difficult, as some of the workers believed that they would be fired. Others, though, thought that they should engage with management around wage demands. One worker recalls, other union members such as Noom and Wasa, they were usually laughing at us, telling us that we won't get what we want because the NUM has been there since 30 years. So there's nothing that we can get. We said that the only way we will receive what we were doing, they said that the only thing that will happen is we will get fired. But workers went forward regardless. The numbers began to increase to 10 or 20. One of the earliest winch drivers involved, David, was also a non-unionized worker. He worked at Goldfields at Carleton as well. I'll skip a little bit ahead. The strike began in Kruseleka, where there was a high percentage of non-unionized workers. The informal committee tried to approach NUM several times, but to no avail. As one of the strike leaders later stated, "We can look for our own interests. Even AMCU is not part of this action because we do not need unions to represent us." Soon the struggle shifted from merely winch drivers to workers more generally. David recalled that most of the employees were interested in what we usually talk about. Every day, every night, we would discuss what can we make so that we can put our demands in front of the company so that all of us, all of the classes underground, we want not only RDOs or winch drivers, but all of us, we want at least our salaries to be adjusted. By the end of May, Dylan and Solomon had visited management to engage with them about wage demands and Solomon kept a diary of their meetings. He explained that we were following all these processes in order that if the company wants to fire us, we show them the records, that we have followed the proper procedures. The meetings became bigger and bigger, and in August, the informal leaders decided that the workers should meet during the day so that anyone could come. During this time, Solomon had written up a memorandum with the core demand being 16,070 rands. The numbers attending the mass meetings at Jabula, the hostel near Kruseleka where the strike began, swelled to about 6,000, and all the workers were now committed to the common memorandum. So eventually they kept striking. Then they started involving more and more of the shafts like Komanani and Tembulani. Then eventually it was almost the entire Rustenburg region. They went on strike. The strike lasted a long time. There were announcements which said there was going to be 12,000 Amplatz workers fired. Then these same leaders went to Northam and to the other mines in order to get more people to go on strike. They looked for leaders, they identified leaders, and they convinced leaders, it seems, to continue